For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for more updates.
Did you know that India's energy consumption is less than a tenth of that of the United States? Did you know that solar installations in India have grown 12-fold since 2015? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabh. One of the worst kept secrets is that the world is poised to breach the global warming ceiling of 1.5 degrees centigrade. At the least, the climate change bomb is ticking. Exactly why the upcoming conversations at COP28 in Dubai are hugely significant. Regardless of the outcome, one thing is becoming increasingly clear, that India is emerging as the next biggest source of energy demand in the world. Exactly why any choices it makes with respect to the energy, whether it is hydrocarbons or renewables, will deeply influence not just the commodity markets in the world, particularly with respect to oil, but also the battle that the world is taking on to contain climate change. This begs the obvious question, what will be the contours of this energy transition that India seeks? To understand this, we spoke to Atul Arya. He's the Chief Strategist for S&P Global Commodity Insights and one of the most known domain experts on energy transitions. Recently, Atul co-authored a report called GESI, or the Global Energy Solutions Initiative. It's basically a snapshot of all the transition initiatives being undertaken across the world. I was curious to know whether the recent upheavals in geopolitics, particularly the spread of regional conflicts to the Middle East, has impacted these energy transitions. Have they slowed them or have they simply derailed them?
The thing is that the world is always in transition. Energy transition is happening 24/7. The pace changes. Clearly, the map of the global map of energy is being reset, and where we end up, we don't know yet, because things like the Ukraine-Russia war, the outcome of that will determine Russia's role as a very large energy producer and exporter in the world of energy. But the transition itself, I think the focus on energy security in some ways has overtaken everything else, and affordability, because prices went up, and places in the global south, large countries, had to pay a lot more money for oil and gas, oil in particular, and that creates huge challenges, and that has slowed down the transition. But we are still transitioning, but in slightly different ways, I would say. And you have to see how all of the conflicts, what happens to them and over time.
So you believe basically it is, hopefully it is delayed and not derailed. So Atul, you mentioned affordability and energy security. Now, if we add the third parameter, sustainability, you have the energy trilemma, which your report has also alluded to. So do you believe that this trilemma can be resolved within the existing frameworks that the world is operating in?
I think it's going to be very difficult. In all honesty, and I think you know this well, Anil, that the world has never kind of fully resolved the trilemma. We didn't call it the trilemma. Sometimes it was the dilemma. And also there is a fourth component to it, which we address in our report, which is around energy access. So, linked to affordability, but there are hundreds of millions of people who still don't have access to energy. So we shouldn't forget that. So I think as they say, the world muddles along, and sometimes it is easier and sometimes it is more difficult. If you go back a few years, nobody was talking about energy except for climate part of the energy, right? It was a lot more focus on sustainability and less on security. So I think we are now in a phase where security is still paramount. Like for example, as you know, last year European countries were very concerned about supply of gas. Will they be able to have enough heating for the citizens of Europe? So I think we will see these kind of ups and downs. Right now, the oil and gas prices have come down a bit, so the concern has somewhat reduced. But clearly, we have the COP meeting coming up, where all of these issues, particularly sustainability, will be front and center as we go forward. No easy solution to trilemma anywhere in the world. That's the way I would put it. That's what we heard from from the interviews we did.
So just also wanted to ask you on another feedback that you may have got. Many of reports have been released recently, particularly from the UN, IEA, everyone arguing how the circumstance is extremely inclement, and the world has probably already breached the 1.5 degree ceiling. So, but did you get that sense of urgency, particularly from those in the global south, given that this climate change bomb is not just ticking, it's now active?
Yeah, you're right that and also we shouldn't forget that climate. As I see climate change, it is the ultimate great equalizer, right? It does not discriminate between rich and poor in the north and south. Everybody is impacted by it, and we have seen those impacts, all the way, in places in the U.S. and in Europe, and of course Pakistan last year, and India, and Africa. So we are seeing in the people we talked with. They are as concerned about climate change as everybody else in the richer countries. But there is another imperative for many of them, which is access to energy. And one of the phrases we have in our report, we call this stranded lives versus stranded assets. So there are a lot of concerns of this phrase stranded assets, meaning oil and gas assets in particular, or coal. Will be stranded, meaning we won't be able to use them. But people in the South said, well, why are you so worried about those physical assets where we have lives stranded because we don't have access to energy? So in many parts of the world, access to energy is more paramount, more important than climate change. It doesn't mean they are not worried about climate change. They are worried about climate change, but also they want, they feel that if they have some access to energy, then they will be able to fight climate change. Many people told us, don't come and tell us about decarbonizing because we don't even have any carbon, so we need to carbonize before we decarbonize. So that's the kind of challenges, hundreds of millions of people around the world face.
So, Atul, if you, in many ways, your Jesse report seems to have set the context for the upcoming conversations at COP28 in Dubai. So how complex, given all that you have heard and chronicled, is this energy transition for the world?
Yeah, it's, the COP28, we say this about every COP, but I have to remind people, listeners that this is going to be a very important meeting on multiple fronts. The COP has evolved a bit, and if you go back to Glasgow, there was a lot of positive vibe coming out of Glasgow, although the oil and gas industry was not there, energy industry more broadly. But the vibe was, we can do this. We are on a path to energy transition. But then things changed. We were still coming out of COVID, and then of course Russia-Ukraine war happened. So that context changed what governments can do. And now we're coming up to Dubai. There are a number of very significant issues, and we can come back to some of them, Anil. But this is a very important meeting, and also the role of the industry, particularly energy industry, oil and gas industry. Are they part of the solution or are they part of the problem? I mean, my own view is that oil and gas industry has to be part of the solution because they know a lot of things which can be helpful to transition the world. But that's going to be one of the big issues, along with financing and other rules for carbon markets and so on. So we are going to see a number of these issues. But the other thing I should mention is that, sorry, I alluded to your question, is that each country is going to do this differently. We shouldn't be expecting that there will be a single monolithic path to transition. Transition is going to be what we call multidimensional, and that would mean that every country will do things differently because they are coming from different starting points. They have different geographies, they have different physical assets, and their needs of their people are different.
But do you believe the global north is willing to accept this multidimensional framework? Because once you accept that, there are different starting points for everyone, including big potential energy consumers like India.
Yeah, I think the global north is realizing that a single roadmap is not going to work. There is a lot of pushback on it. I'm sure you are seeing, for example, given where you are, in Africa, many of the African countries have found gas, and in some cases oil as well, but gas, and they want to develop those gas assets, and they have had challenges getting financing, particularly from the multilateral institutions. So that those challenges are, the they're coming down a little bit, I would say. So is Global North fully accepting? I think Global North also is not a single entity, as we know, right? I mean, there are different countries with different views. And I think what we are seeing is more acceptance of the view that we can't have a top-down approach. We can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And let's be cognizant to the needs of the people, poor people, many who are still cooking with wood or cow dung. And if they can get LPG to cook, as we know happened in India very successfully, that's energy transition. So let's not force them into some other framework to say you have to use everything you do has to be renewables. So I feel that the North is listening, and I think this is going to be a pretty significant debate in Dubai. We'll be watching how the North and South can come together, and the COP president, Dr. Sultan, has a very significant challenge to bring everybody together and come out with some common goals.
But what you're saying is basically that means there's a democratization of energy transition, which is a very healthy thing. It's a very powerful political economy, given the context of the debate that has existed so far. It has been more of top-down, whether not just in climate change, we have seen it in trade, we've seen it in every aspect. So you're basically suggesting that there's a possible pivot underway.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, just go back a few months back. Actually, India is still president of G20 through the end of this month, right? When the G20 happened in Delhi, the leaders summit, and I was there. The tone was very different, right? The tone was that some of the smaller or smaller size economies in G20 are equal, and then of course Africa was admitted, the African Union was admitted, which I think was both substantially and symbolically a very important move to say, look, we need to have, it's not just should be a club of the rich. I mean, we already have sort of G7 in some ways, but we should be thinking about a broader framework and bringing more people together, because these problems are global problems, whether they're around trade or around things like critical minerals, which is another big issue for energy transition. So we need to be thinking in a more holistic way. I think it's a very healthy thing. And let's not forget, Anil, that many of the solutions for energy transition are going to come from Global South, because they have a lot of innovation going on. They know how to solve the problems locally better in many cases than somebody coming and telling them, well, here is the answer for you. We have seen that in sort of economic development historically, that local solutions have in many cases worked much better than some top-down outside solutions. So democratization of energy, as you say, is definitely happening, and also climate change and climate solutions, not just climate change, but climate solutions is very much happening these days.
So that actually segues into my next question, which is that implicitly the Jesse report is saying that any energy transition will have to go through China and India. Okay, let's focus on India. The recent actions that the Indian government has undertaken, but you alluded to one, which is LPG, universalizing LPG, the accent on life, which the PM has championed along with the UN. Now, does all this suggest to you that India now increasingly sees itself as part of the solution than previous stance where it was always part of the problem. So it was approached any negotiation at a zero-sum game.
Yeah, I think there is, there are two dimensions to it, as you know, Anil. One is what happens in the negotiations, and there's a lot of, lot of debate and dialogue. So I'll come back to the negotiation, but let's talk about actual practically what is happening in India. And it's similar to many other countries. India is on a path to deploying renewables, solar in particular, but also wind at mass scale. They're big ambitions, and that is the right thing to do. If the costs are down, deploy as much renewables as possible. Now, supply chains is an issue. Building more solar panels in India will be a good thing over time. But right now, this is what they are doing that. So that's a great thing for India. We did a separate report for India in August, in which I wrote an article about India's energy future. And one of the things I said is that this kind of goes back to your broader question about the role of India and the role of many countries like India, like Indonesia, Malaysia, some of the larger economies, that the focus should be on making the best use of energy for economic development. So energy efficiency, energy productivity. There's a lot of wastage, a lot of sort of plants which are running, for a long time at low efficiency. So focus on that. By doing that and doing things like renewables deployment, if your emissions go up for a while, it's not the end of the world. I mean, already, we should remember that India, and in particular India and other similar countries, have been low end of the cumulative emissions historically. So they have room. They need more carbon. More of the carbon budget needs to go to Africa and countries like India, so they can grow. And over time, in the 30s and the 40s, that will be the time for them to start to plateau their emissions and then to bring them down. And that is what we think will happen as more renewables come in line. For example, in India, coal-fired power will start to diminish. The idea that you say, well, stop all coal tomorrow is completely impractical. I mean, you and I know coal is not just about coal mining in India. It's about railways. It's about steel plant. I mean, there's so many industries which depend on coal, and you can't, as so many people's employment. So you just can't do that. And
Final question, Atul, is that given all that we have talked today, now the ball is actually in the court of global north. Your report very clearly states that the global south is willing to walk the talk, but on a differential trajectory, depending on each circumstance. Now, the global north has to accept this democratic stance that global south has exhibited, and also generate the finance required to enable energy access that you mentioned earlier. Are they willing to walk the talk on both these key issues?
well, we will see. I don't want to predict here. We will see in a few weeks. I'll give you a few kind of signposts which are, I think, important. One is that there is strong desire for more technology transfer. We're already seeing the benefit of deployment of solar PV and wind around the world. It's pretty much universally deployed at the highest technology. So I think that has been a good example, and we will see more of those. I mean, if you look at, for example, hydrogen, it's a very hot topic right now. There's a hydrogen mission in India. There's hydrogen in Europe and in the US. So I think we'll see this kind of mashing up of technology. And the big thing we should be looking for is, will private capital go into these into the global south? And I think in that case, India has a great advantage, because a lot of private capital for energy and climate change is going into the global south, but not into Africa, because of the higher degree of risk as many investors feel there is in Africa. So that needs to be an important sign. In terms of the multilateral organizations like the World Bank, they're providing funding. I am very optimistic, and the World Bank is going through a very significant reform, and their new head of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, I had the opportunity to listen to him about 3 weeks back. He was very articulate. I thought he laid out the vision very, very clearly, that the bank has to change, and the bank is going to change, and it is going to provide financing. Even going back to my earlier point about financing for or oil and gas. That has to change. So it's not just about financing for renewables. And the last piece of financing, which in a way is even more critical, is for adaptation. For all of the loss and damage type of financing which is needed, so that the poor countries can be resilient to climate change. The good news here, in my view, Anil, is that the COP is happening in UAE. It's one of the richest countries in the world. It has deep pockets. I think UAE is going to set the example. This is my guess, that they will take the lead to say, here are some funds, some money we want to invest in these issues, whether it is for technology, for deployment of projects, or for loss and damage, and then bring the other richer countries together.
There are several takeaways from our conversation with Atul. It is very obvious that on the positive side, the adoption of electric vehicles or non-conventional energy sources like solar power have spread across the world. There are increasing instances of this. On the other side, you seem to see an ideological pivot. The global north is no longer stuck to its theme of a top-down approach to combating climate change. In fact, from what Atul told us, it is willing to look at energy transitions specific to countries in their particular development status. The big concern, though, is that the unfortunate turn of geopolitical events would undermine all these gains. Exactly why COP28 becomes that much more significant. There's lots of soul searching to do, so all eyes on Dubai. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Strat News Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.